morning, everyone. It's really nice to be with you today. And you talk about closely connected. I'm sort of quasi-related to this guy right here. This Tim Tomes is, and I share grandchildren. So, yeah, he's the guy. And we're going to baptize one of them tomorrow. Yeah. I'm really so glad to be. This is an incredibly interesting, busy weekend for me. I actually live in Texas. So, when I was invited to come up north in January, I said, sure, yeah, that'd be just perfect. But came up, my wife Tammy and I also have a place in Ann Arbor, came up to speak yesterday for the CIT. Any of you are familiar with CIT? It's the Concordia Invitational Tournament. It's the longest running basketball tournament second longest running basketball tournament in the country. Only behind the NIT tournament. Indiana's basketball state, right? You guys understand Hoosiers? Yeah, okay. So anyway, I got to speak to the teams yesterday, the basketball teams, men's and women's teams, dance teams, cheer squads. It's the last year of CIT, the very last year. And it's extraordinarily bittersweet for me because it's always been such a meaningful tournament and enjoyed it so much through the years. I'll say a little more about that in just a bit. But so that, and then get to come over to Fort Wayne this morning to be with you folks, which is a great privilege, and thank you for the invitation. And then to baptize little Chloe Elizabeth Tomes tomorrow back in Ann Arbor at University Lutheran Chapel. What a great weekend. So the weather aside, it's been a real joy. And I got here on Monday just in time for the coldest, and I lived in Wisconsin for 30 years, so you'd think, but it takes about 10 minutes living somewhere else for your blood to thin, and so I guess I have the thin blood. We're going to talk about leadership, and Pastor asked me to do that, and my first reaction was, I don't know anything about that topic. I really have no clue, other than, I was college president for 24 years. I mean, so I was a leader, I guess you could say, and I've had some leadership responsibility. But if you've come this morning ready to take notes, expecting to walk away with, here are the three things that I'm going to be able to apply in my life to become a more effective servant leader, well, you might come up with three, but you're going to have to work, you're going to have to figure that out probably on your own. You're going to have to make those applications yourself, because I'm not going to tell you. But I do tell stories, so I hope that you like stories. And the original title of this is going to be Lessons from a Leader, kind of things I've sort of learned along the way. And hopefully that we'll gather together some applications if you're a practical person. If you're somebody who just likes stories, it'll be better for you. But there will be some opportunity for application as well. But I want you to think about this for a moment. When we think about leaders, and the same question could be applied to just any of us at any time. Are leaders born or are they made? This is sort of the classic kind of, if you're interested in educational pedagogy or educational theory, the old nature versus nurture argument, right? And are we more a product of our genetics or of our environment? And what do you think? I mean, why don't you just for a moment, just the person next to you, we're going to do a little of this now and then, sometimes that makes me feel very uncomfortable, but if you like the person next to you, it's not a problem. So just for a minute, if you kind of had to tilt the scales, because obviously it's not just one or the other, right? It's not just nature, no nurture. It's not just genetics, environment. But if you had to kind of tilt the balance, would you say leaders are more born or are they made? Just for a second, talking to somebody right next to you. What's the consensus? That who thinks that it's more on the tilting to the balance of nature, of genetics, that leaders are born to be leaders? Okay, it seems like this room tilts toward the side of the room. This side. How many think it's more like a product of your environment, the things you've learned along the way? Okay, kind of a few more hands. Fate or chance, right? Well, those are neither words that that Christians like to use very much. But so does the person define the times, or do the times define the person? Right? I taught history. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. You think about kind of historical moments. Is it just a coincidence that you had all these extraordinary leaders during the Second World War, or was it because of what was happening during that time that all of a sudden leaders are created, right? So I don't know. I mean, personally, I don't know or have a strong feeling one way or the other, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about my leadership journey. Most of it will be environmental, I guess, because I'll talk about my experiences. But let me start with nature. I was born. I was born in Denver, Colorado. Still feels like home to me, right? Still feels like I have a couple brothers who live there. I'm still a rabid Denver Bronco fan. We're getting better. It's been a while, but we're getting better. I was born into a wonderful family. My parents were Lefty and Billy. That sounds like a couple of gangsters, doesn't it? I mean, really, think of it. Lefty and Billy. Wonderful people. Just, my dad was a bricklayer. He worked with his hands. That has not been genetically passed on to me. I'm like the most non-mechanical person you'll ever meet. I just asked my wife. And my mom stayed at home with us. It was very humble, kind of very blue collar. My dad, he never made more than $10,000 or $11,000 a year, and in those days that was more than it is now, obviously. But we weren't poor. I never thought we went without anything. I was just very happy. In retrospect now, I think very humble family. I'm not sure exactly what they passed on to me. Moving fast forward for just a moment, my son-in-law, Zach, my other son-in-law, first time that my daughter brought him home to meet our family, they had gone to Concordia, Seward, Nebraska, and Zach was down in the basement. Actually, it was in Wisconsin anyway. And so he's down in the basement, and my brother-in-law comes into the house and says, "Hey, Hannah's boyfriend is here, Zach Meineke. His dad went to the same college we went to. His dad was Dave Meineke." And my brother-in-law, Tom, said, "Dave Meineke? Wild man Dave Meineke?" So Zach comes upstairs, and I said, "Hey, Zach, what's this? Is your dad wild man Dave Meineke?" He said, "Well, I'm a lot more like my mom." I'm a lot more like my mom, too. I'm a lot more like Billy than Lefty. Although I think I inherited some things from Lefty, too. And once in a while, people in my family will say to me, "You're acting a lot like your dad right now." And they never mean that as a compliment for whatever reason. But they were dear people, and I loved them very much. I was a public school kid. And I'll tell you why in just a little bit here, but I was a public school kid, went to Jefferson County Public Schools in suburban Denver. In fact, I went to Jefferson High School, and we were the Jefferson Saints. That was our mascot. And our fight song was "When the Saints Go Marching In," right? It wasn't a Christian school. I don't know why, we called ourselves the Saints. It was just what we did. One of the schools that was in our conference was Columbine High School. That's the most famous high school in Jefferson County, and not for good reason. Many years before the tragedy that unfolded there, I remember playing a basketball game at Columbine High School. And I guess I was getting on the nerves of the guy who was defending me. And anyway, he just punched me, knocked me out. I think he got a foul for that. Tells you something about those Columbine kids anyway. But Columbine, and we were the Jefferson Saints. But I wasn't a saint. Still, I still have my moments, but this wonderful family that I grew up in Denver, Colorado, just outside of Denver, was not a Christian family. We weren't, I grew up in an unchurched family. And I think some of my friends were Christians. There were some Catholic kids I know and a few others who went to church, but we didn't talk about it very much. So we didn't really talk about what it meant to be a saint in any way. It just wasn't a part of the discussion. Once in a while, when I was real young, my mom would drive my sister and I to Sunday school, to the little Methodist school not far from where we lived. But it was kind of a burden, and we didn't like it very much and didn't do it very often. I remember one very embarrassing Sunday morning, we got into this Volkswagen that was one of the 1961 VW Bug, and we didn't notice it when we left the driveway. The car backfired as you drove it along, but a squirrel had died and fallen on the front of the car, and we're driving down to Edgewater Methodist Church. The car's backfiring, the squirrel is dangling, and they drop us off, and I just didn't like going to Sunday school that much. It was kind of embarrassing sort of experience. But anyway, so I didn't grow up in the church. It just wasn't a part of our lives in any way. We didn't talk about it. It wasn't like we were antagonistic. It just was completely irrelevant. Completely irrelevant. Well, one of the things that I enjoyed most about Jefferson High School was playing basketball, the Columbine game aside, and I had this idea that I wanted to play in college. Delusions of grandeur, we might describe it now, but in those, I thought, I'd really like to play college basketball. And the neighbors next door to us, dear friends still, they were actually LCMS Lutherans, right? They sent their kids to Bethlehem Lutheran School, and then one of the sons, a few years older than me, went to St. John's College in Winfield, Kansas. Now, any Johnnies in this group? Wow, we are a dying breed for sure. But so, St. John's College in Winfield, Kansas, and my neighbor friend mentioned to the coach that I might be somebody who would like to play at St. John's, and so they recruited me a little bit. And they recruited me. They gave me a basketball scholarship to come. It was $250, I think, which seemed like just unbelievable. I was just so excited that I got a basketball scholarship. Now, it was the only school in all of America that recognized my athletic prowess and was going to let me play college basketball. But I'd mentioned I'm from Denver, right? So how many of you have been to Denver? Or when you think of Denver, what do you think of besides the Broncos? You think of the mountains, right? You think of this sort of kind of beautiful city nestled up against the Rocky Mountains. St. John's College was in Winfield, Kansas. How many have been to Winfield, Kansas? Oh, a few of you, yeah. What a joy, huh? So, Winfield, Kansas, about 500 miles from Denver, and it's not in the middle of nowhere, right? But you can see it from there. Right? It's one claim to fame is that it was the fictional home of Mary Ann on Gilligan's Island, right? She said she was from Winfield, Kansas. So, I'm aging myself, I realize. But I wanted to play college basketball, right? That was very important to me. And so, since it was the only school in all of America that was going to recognize my athletic prowess, then I was going to do it. I was going to go there. And at that time, it was only a 2-year school. So I also thought, I'll show them, right? After that, it'll be UCLA or North Carolina. Well, we'll show them, right? So I remember Billy and Lefty. I remember us pulling out of the driveway. We graduated from the Volkswagen to a Ford Granada. We had all my kind of possessions in the trunk, and we're backing out of the driveway. And I remember feeling homesick before we got 2 blocks away. I'm just 18-year-old kid, leaving my family and lots of good friends, bringing one along with me. I'll mention him in a little bit. But heading down I-70, mountains fading in the background, heading east, then south a little bit, winding up in Winfield, Kansas. And that first night, when all the other kids were doing what they called icebreakers to get acquainted, I remember getting on my bicycle and riding over to where my parents were staying, the hotel that they stayed in. I actually stayed in that same hotel this last summer for nostalgia's sake. But I remember going up and I was going to knock on the door and say, I can't do it. I want to go back home. I just can't do it. But I didn't. I decided, I'm going to play college basketball and we're going to make this work. Well, they left me there. I continued to be very homesick, and regrettably in those days, seasons didn't last all year long. They just began when they began, and that wasn't until later in October. So I had several weeks of not playing basketball, and I didn't like it. I missed my family, had a lot of good friends, and so I resorted to what was the only way of staying in touch with people in those days. And maybe some of you remember this kind of ancient form of communication, right? You take parchment and quill and you leather but I write letters. I wrote letters. I wrote letters during class. I wrote letters instead of going to class. I wrote letters late into the evening because I was always the first one at the mailbox first thing in the morning, because I discovered that writing letters is also the best way to get letters back, right? And so I was a letter-writing fiend, a champion, and I, maybe already a budding historian or antiquarian, I also kept all the letters that people wrote to me. I went back and read them several years ago. It's kind of, well, never mind. It was silly, but there was one week, for example, that I received 28 personal letters. I mean, could you believe that? I mean, I had that. A lot of them were from my mom, but other friends too. But my mom wrote letters to me, and I wrote letters to her too. And she kept all the letters that I wrote to her as well. And I found those, discovered those later on. So I was able to kind of go back and reconstruct our conversation. This 18-year-old freshman boy, and his poor Billy. Poor Billy. She's just trying her best to help me to feel comfortable and to hang in there, and you're going to be okay. It's just such a pathetic story, really. And I still complain a lot, I realize, but not as much as then. And it was just really felt sorry for myself, as I often do. But but eventually basketball season would start, right? Eventually it started, and what I didn't know when I went to St. John's College, I probably should have known, was that I was going to have the opportunity to play basketball on what was arguably the worst team in the history of collegiate sports. Now, I should have known that, right? They're the only ones that recruited me. So just to give you an example, we jumped out to an 0-10 start, right? So that took us up to the Christmas break. We're 0-10. It went home for Christmas, and I thought, I'm just staying. I'm not going back. This is ridiculous. But I'd made a couple of friends, and they convinced me to come back because, hey, right in January, we're going to have this tournament. It's going to be a tournament. There are going to be all these other, Lutheran colleges there. It'll be a lot of fun, a round-robin tournament. Kind of like CIT for the junior colleges, right? CIT historically was the two seminaries in Seward and River Forest, and lately it's been Mequon and Ann Arbor have been a part of that. But this was St. John's College. We were hosting, and our first game that night was against Concordia Milwaukee. Wow, never heard of the place, right? Didn't have any idea that one day I'd be the president there for 24 years, right? So they beat us pretty badly. They were good then. They're pretty good now, although they lost last night. No, never mind. Then we played Concordia, Texas. That's kind of the neighborhood where I live now, and they beat us too. But it was a round robin, and there was one more team there. It was not the Concordia. It was St. Paul's College from Concordia, Missouri. Right. When it comes to to naming ourselves in the Missouri Synod. We're not terribly creative, are we? So they didn't want to call themselves Concordia College, Concordia. So they're St. Paul's College. But anyway, we got to see them play their first 2 games, and we noticed that they weren't very good either. And so, you know, we had some hopes. And in fact, at halftime in our game against St. Paul's College, Concordia, Missouri, we were leading. We were ahead. It was the first time all season that we went in to the locker room at halftime leading in a game, and we didn't quite know how to behave. We didn't know how to act, so we're sort of giggling, you know, snapping each other with towels and kind of acting silly, and go out in the second half and we fall behind. And then it's back and forth until, with just a few seconds left in the game, not quite like Ann Arbor's dramatic 3-point shot last night to beat Concordia, Wisconsin, go Cards. But anyway, we, on a nearly last-second shot by a point guard from Denver, Colorado, who will otherwise remain anonymous, we won. We won by 1 point. We beat St. Paul's College, Concordia, Missouri by 1 point. And so you're sitting there thinking, well, okay, then you were not the worst team in the history of collegiate sports because you beat St. Paul's College, Concordia, Missouri. Just a little bit more to this particular story. This was in January, about this time of year, maybe a little earlier. We got the bad news after that weekend that 4 out of the 5 starters on our team were academically ineligible for the second semester. So not only were we not athletic, we were not particularly bright either, right? And so we show up at the next game. 4 of us show up at the next game. There are only 4. And this is a Hoosier State. You know about basketball. It's a quintet that's required, not a quartet that's required for basketball. So we show up, 4 guys. 4 guys. We make a call to Raywinkle Hall for somebody to come down and join us. You know, you call in the payphone, nobody answers the payphone. It's not for you. It just rings and rings. A couple of guys had shown up to work in the concession stand. They weren't going to have much to do that night. Anyway, they put uniforms on. We had guys who played that night and the rest of the season who didn't even play in high school, right? They weren't even planning to play intramurals, right? And that was our team the rest of the way. A team that went 1 win and 25 losses. And thank the Lord we didn't have to play St. Paul's College from Concordia, Missouri again, because they would have trounced us. We lost 1 game, just to give you an example. We lost 1 game to Barton County Community College. Now we're talking Barton County Community College here, right? Yeah. They beat us 148 to 50. So it's not that we gave up 100. We lost by 98 points. It was the only time all season that we were stalling late in the game, trying to avert a triple-digit loss, and we were successful at least at that. So anyway, so we lost. So you might think that what a terrible freshman year, right? But as I reflect on it, it was the best year of my life. And for a lot of reasons, but the most important one is that I came to understand what St. Paul the Apostle meant when he wrote in Romans. Well, let me tell you what he wrote before he wrote what he wrote. Okay. First, he quotes the psalmist, and he says, "All we like sheep face the slaughter." That should have been the theme verse for our basketball team, right? All we like sheep face the slaughter. It didn't matter. Every game we played, we knew we were going to get crushed. We knew we were going to get crushed. And our coach, the sainted Ralph Scove, the guy who recruited me, I mean, what a remarkable and wonderful guy he was. But our colors were black and orange, and he wore black leisure suit. Those were popular in those days, polyester leisure suit. He wore black leisure suit with orange socks and white buck shoes. And Ralph had these black horn-rimmed glasses, and before one of our games, these big horn-rimmed glasses, before one of our games, a band member from the opposing team threw the ball, it was time to collect the balls, threw the ball. Ralph turned around at just the wrong moment, boom, right in the head, broke his glasses, goes into the locker room for the game, tapes up his glasses in the middle with athletic tape, comes out, if dressing for success were the objective, we got exactly what we deserved, right? All we like sheep face the slaughter. But St. Paul goes on from there. He says, we face famine, we face peril, we face nakedness, we face sword. And yet, he says, and yet in all of these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. You know, to all the world, and from where I stood, I felt like, not a Lutheran, I felt like a loser, right? I felt like a loser. And yet, in the midst of that experience, as I interacted with other kids, most of them Lutheran kids, and faculty members who brought Christ into the curriculum, one in particular I'll mention in a moment, I came to understand what that meant for the first time in my life, right? So I was baptized, I was confirmed a Lutheran. I went back home, told this friend of mine who had gone to St. John's with me that, you know, I decided I'm going to join the Lutheran Church. He said, you know, he had the same kind of experience. His name is Reed Lessing. Some of you know Reed Lessing. Reed followed me to St. John's College. There's no other way to put it. We were childhood friends. He didn't know what he was going to do. I thought about joining the military. I said, why don't you come with me? And so he did. I mean, I don't know if people do things like that anymore, but he did. Came. And Reed was also confirmed that next summer after our freshman year. And those of you who don't know Reed Lessing, my goodness, just an incredible theologian, scholar, pastor, teacher. I'm very proud of him. When we were kids, he was one of our good friends, but he was kind of the guy that you picked on, you know. You know, we teased each other a lot, and I'm not proud of it now in retrospect, but you know, we all teased each other a lot, and so sometimes I go back home and I tell our old friends about Reed. I say, now Reed, he's just this amazing preacher, speaker, teacher, writer, prolific writer. And they say, Reed? Yeah, Reed. God bless him. But anyway, not long after that, my sister followed me to St. John's College, and then she was baptized and confirmed. And then my mom, Billy, she didn't want my sister to have to go through confirmation instruction by herself, so she went along. And then she went through it herself, and she was confirmed. And then my brother, and then his wife, and then my other brother, and then I went back to Colorado for graduate school, and I was an assistant pastor in the Denver area. And I had my own father in confirmation class, right? So, lefty. You hear stories about preachers' kids in confirmation class. Try having your own dad as one of your confirmands, right? He was just not easy student to deal with, but you know, and so all of them became members. You know, they all became members of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and now my parents, Billy and Lefty, are members of the church triumphant in the nearer presence of Jesus, right? And so who do I have to thank for that, right? I thank the Lord, of course, first of all and foremost. But I thank the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and its institutions of higher learning that had such a profound shaping influence on my life. And it was then in those days that I nurture nature. Well, it was that environment that caused me to begin to think that I'd like to be a part of something like that someday, and to work toward that. One of the most influential professors I had at St. John's College and then later at the seminary here in Fort Wayne was a fellow named John Seleska. Now I know the Seleskas have been gone for a long time, but they were fixtures here in Fort Wayne for many years. But he was a wonderful, I mean, the most influential person in my life for sure. Great teacher, funny. Their home, before they moved to Wisconsin after they retired, was just a few miles from here, so coming back, all this nostalgia. But he was just a remarkable guy, a fantastic teacher. I mean, I was so impressed with him that I married his daughter, you know. It's just, no, actually, Tammy and I had our first date my freshman year, so that was also good, right? Meeting Jesus was really good, and meeting Tammy was good too, although that our romance didn't blossom right away. Maybe it was our first date. I took Reed's Volkswagen. I drove Volkswagens a lot. Drove it up to Wichita, took Tammy. She agreed to go on a date with me. Went to a movie, went out to dinner afterward, pizza place. I was about 60 cents short. She had put a dollar bill in her pocket and bailed me out. You know, some things never change. She's always bailing me out. But anyway, St. John's College. Came home for the summer, ran into an LCMS guy who knew I'd gone there, a fellow by the name of Laverne Cadow, pulled me aside and he said, you know, I think you should think about being a pastor. That thought had not crossed my mind at that point. You know, I knew I liked what was happening at St. John's, I knew what was happening in my life. Just one guy pulls a young guy to the side and he says, I think you ought to think about being a pastor. Just planted a seed. And folks, when you encounter one of those folks in your congregation, young or old, who you think might be fertile ground for a seed to be planted, it can go a lot farther than you probably would ever realize. And I don't think Laverne ever knew what an impact that made on me. Well, I sort of took him up on that eventually, and I went to seminary, came right here to Fort Wayne to the SEM, and this was also part of my own kind of leadership formation, obviously. The experience I had here, I would say that at the seminary, the goal was to get us as seminarians to think theologically. And they would tell you that you know, we want you to leave here thinking theologically. And of course, they were also preparing you, at least at an entry level, to be pastors. But I think they worked harder at getting you to think theologically than to think pastorally. And that's not meant to be a criticism, right? You kind of learn by doing. It's meant to be sort of a criticism. But you kind of learn more by doing in some ways, and they prepare you for that entry level. But I think profoundly, they have, that experience has caused me to think theologically. And I'm sure other pastors who are here may be able to relate to that, perhaps all of you, but there's very few thoughts that go through my mind that don't go through that filter somehow, right? I'm constantly thinking theologically about something. And sometimes that's helpful, and sometimes it's maybe not, but in any case, it's true, it's real. And that, I would say, has been, again, critical to my formation. Although I don't think formation was really the strength of the seminary. Information was certainly a strength. You get a lot of depth and detail about doctrine and theology. Reformation is big at the seminary. And our roots are in the 16th century, right? And sometimes we act as if we still lived in the 16th century. And that's not a criticism either, by the way, because right after the seminary, I decided I wanted to study 16th century history. So it made an impression on me, right? I was very interested in it. In fact, reading about Luther himself was very influential for me in my own kind of growth in the faith. But instead of taking a call right away, I left the seminary and I went back home to Colorado. I don't think it was homesickness at that point, but I went back home to Colorado and I enrolled in a graduate program in studying history, Renaissance and Reformation history. And I ended up doing a PhD there in that field as well. And so if the seminary taught me to think theologically, that graduate experience subsequently got me to think historically and to think critically in a way that, you know, quite honestly, seminary doesn't ask you to think critically. They ask you to criticize, but not to think critically. Graduate school made me think critically. I was suddenly in a place where not everybody agreed with me to kind of the nth degree. And if you were off a little on that nth degree, they would come after you, right? People, they came from all kinds of perspectives, all kinds of points of view. And it was at once intimidating and also liberating. It was scary and it was thrilling. And I was still writing about church historical topics that interested me. But I had to go through a whole different filter, right, to think about ways in which I could be successful in that regard. And so I was very grateful for that experience too. So now I think about everything with kind of dual filters as I approach the topics that are in front of me. I left Colorado after my father was confirmed and went north to Wyoming, where I was a campus pastor for a couple of years. And it was at that time that I was beginning to live out what I wanted to be my leadership journey, my service journey. I wanted to work with college students. So I was the campus pastor at the University of Wyoming in Laramie for 2 years. And it was a delight and a great experience. But it was only 2 years later that Concordia University, Wisconsin, offered me a position to come and teach history at Concordia. And that's what I really wanted to do. So we packed up our family. My wife Tammy and I had been married, I don't know, not very many years by that time, but we already had 4 children. We were only in Wyoming 2 years. We had 2 kids while we were there. And then it seemed like every place we went, we had a baby. We had a baby on Vicarage in Minnesota. We had a baby in Colorado when we went there. We had 2 in Wyoming. We moved to Wisconsin. We had 1 there, so we didn't move for 30 years. Right. But anyway, so we moved to Wisconsin. Concordia was in Mequon by then, no longer in Milwaukee. It had been there for a couple of years, and it was there that I was professor, still pastor. I felt like a campus pastor in many ways. And then only 6 years into that journey, at the age of 38, I was elected president of Concordia University, Wisconsin. 38 years old. I mean, what were they thinking? Yeah. And how in the world could they imagine that I would be ready for an experience like that? Now, I've learned recently that Robert Hutchins, who was the president of the president of University of Chicago, right? Very prominent, prestigious University of Chicago. He was only 30 when he became president, right? So 38 is like an old man. And he was president for 22 years. Robert Hutchins inspired me toward the end of my career when I read, he said, one of the things that he wished he would have done differently in his career would have been to retire sooner. Because the one thing he regretted was not spending more time with his family. And I was just about ready to quit at that time, so that made an impression on me. I'll mention him again in just a little bit. But I was 38 years old, and just a year before I had finished my PhD, and gosh, this was just quite a surprise, actually. I had a call to be the vice president of academics at Concordia, Texas, near where we live now. And I thought that's the way the Lord was leading. I got that call a month before the election. And we sold our home in Milwaukee. We didn't have any contingencies on it. We were moving to Texas. We were convinced that we were going to go to Texas because that would be the logical step in my career. I'd been interested in getting more involved in leadership. They were going to give me that opportunity. But I was one of the 5 finalists to be president at Concordia, Wisconsin. And I told the president at Concordia, Texas, hey, we're planning to come, but I am one of the 5 finalists. And he said, hey, sure, that'll be a really good experience for you. Keep your name in the hat. You're not going to get it anyway. We'll see you soon, right? And I wasn't offended by that. I mean, it seemed logical to me too. And then the phone call came from the chair of the Board of Regents that I'd been elected, and I was dumbfounded, absolutely dumbfounded. That day, I was already planning to leave for 2 weeks to do some teaching in Tallinn, Estonia. Got on the plane with my friend Bill Cario, who was also teaching, and I was just, I thank the Lord I had those 2 weeks to kind of just get my wits about me, recover my senses. And anyway, off we went for the beginning of 24 years as the president of Concordia University Mequon, including the last 10 years also Concordia University, Ann Arbor. So that's my environment of preparation for leadership. And I'm going to just pause for a moment, not that there's anything in there that you'd necessarily want to know more about, but questions about that, as that's all just kind of prelude, obviously, but it's my lessons in preparation for leadership. Any questions? So, I think young people, college students, it's the first time you're coming away from, first time you're on your own often, especially in those days. Things have changed somewhat, but you're on your own, and you're making big decisions about who you want to be and what's important in your life, about what you're going to do, maybe who you're going to marry, all those things, big stuff. I don't know that, again, as in terms of pedagogy, but I've often said that those college years can be almost as influential in a person's life as, those early years. Obviously, those are more formative, but this is a very formative time in the lives of some people. And so for students to come to a place like St. John's College or Concordia, where they're going to learn about Jesus, that's an extraordinary mission opportunity. Extraordinary mission opportunity. And I know that there are some folks in our circles who think that our Lutheran schools, for example, should be for our Lutheran students mainly, and for preparation of church workers primarily. I have no problem with saying that that ought to be a real strong priority for us. But I'm going to be the last person in the room who says that we shouldn't recruit athletes who are not Lutherans to come to our school because they're going to learn about Jesus, right? Yesterday, Pastor Duncan in Ann Arbor said, in the 10 years he's been at Concordia Ann Arbor, we have had 126 baptisms. Most of them, he said, have been student athletes. And I almost wept with joy to think that, that my little story, and then the little part that I've had in helping Concordia Ann Arbor to hang around for a little bit longer, that my little story is magnified 126-fold or more, more than that. So I think it's the environment. I think, so I was interested in studying psychology, for example, and John Sleska was my psychology teacher. Well, I took psychology in high school. I never once heard a Bible passage associated with any kind of things that he was teaching. And this was imbued in everything he taught, So it was very, very powerful. And I remain obviously a strong advocate for Christian higher education. Pretty much every day, you watch the news and you get ideas about leadership and about leaders, right? They're models for us to emulate or to avoid. We get a pretty hefty dose of leadership just by watching television, I suspect. For me, I would say this, that in the formation of my own perspective on leadership in life, one thing that has not shaped or formed me almost at all is theory. And I don't say that with pride. I don't say that with pride. But I think in my life I've probably read 2 books on leadership theory. Good to great. It was good. Maybe even great, right? But not that just. I don't like those books. They don't interest me, right? I find them boring, right? I don't go to leadership conferences, right? and that I can walk away with those 6 points that I'm going to, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't, because for some people that is right up their alley. And I think, in fact, it's probably really great. And I was taking one class on leadership, right? I told you that. But that has not formed me. It has not formed me. What has formed me? Well, my faith, right? The examples of Scripture, to be sure. Church history, I'm a church historian. I'm an historian. History has formed me as I think of leaders and how they've interacted in particular situations. I haven't read any leadership books, but I've read tons of books about leaders. Reading a great one right now about Henry V. I mean, unbelievable. Fantastic, right? So those things have formed me. My faith, history. I would say mission. That has formed my perspective. And at Concordia, we had a mission statement. And there was almost never a speech that I made or a talk that I gave where I didn't refer to our mission statement. And what I realized over time was that mission statement was not only Concordia's, but it had become my own. It had become my own, that I was seeking to live the institution's mission in my own life. And we talked about being a Lutheran higher education community that was committed to helping students to develop in mind, body, and spirit for service to Christ in the church and in the world. So really now those last 2 lines, growing in mind, body, and spirit for service to Christ in the church and in the world. That has formed me. That has formed me to grow in those ways, to be better equipped to serve others, not as an end in itself, but to serve others. Mind, body, and spirit. Well, of course, you would think that the college president would be interested in intellectual things, right? Of course, that's important. We want it's an institution of higher learning, after all. Harry Truman said that that all readers are not leaders, but all leaders are readers, right? So I think that sure, you want to grow intellectually. You want to think about that. And when I talk to freshman students, I'd talk to them about the liberal arts education, right, that they were experiencing. And I said, not everything is going to interest you very much, right? Not everything is going to interest you. And so I would ask, for example, how many of you think that history is boring? They knew I was a history teacher. How many of you think that history is boring? And about 10 of them would raise their hands, right? And I said, look, I just told you I was a professor of history, right? Do you realize that there are people who spend their entire lives studying history, teaching? History is not boring. It's not intrinsically boring, right? It might be boring to you, but your job as a student is to tease out of every class that you take, to find what is about this that is really interesting. And your opportunity as a student at this place is to become an educated person, not just to become a nurse, to become an educated nurse, right? Not just to become a business leader, but to become an educated business person. You're going to be somebody, because of your experience here, not just the data points that you're going to learn, you're going to think critically. You're going to be able to speak with some measure of articulation. You're going to be able to write in effective prose. You're going to grow in your mind. You're going to grow intellectually. And so that's been important to me, too, to even try to figure out why math is interesting. It's been hard, and I haven't gotten there yet, but I'm working on it, beyond trying to balance my checkbook, right? So growing in mind, and in spirit, it's a Christian school. It's a Christian school. I'm a Christian, I'm a pastor. To grow in your faith, you can go anywhere to school, and you can be challenged intellectually, right? You can go anywhere and learn to think critically and to write with effective prose and to speak with articulation and on. But when you come to Concordia, you encounter Jesus. You get to encounter Jesus every single day. The one who stands before others and says to them, I am the way, and I am the truth, and I am the life. And no one comes to the Father but by me. You encounter him there, whether you want to or not. You're not going to be able to avoid him on this campus. And you can disregard it, you can not, you can do your best to resist it, but you can't avoid it. And important to me as a leader, of course, is that same growth in spiritual growth, right? That I'm mindful about that. And this helped shape who I am as a leader. But there were three parts, weren't they? Grow in mind, body, and spirit. And this might be a surprise to you, perhaps not. But the part I really want to emphasize in the time that remains is what I think has perhaps formed me as a leader, shaped my thinking more than anything else. And that's being an athlete, the body. And I say that without any sort of pride or arrogance. I think we're all meant to be athletes. Now, some are better athletes than others, right? Bo Nix is a better quarterback than Russell Wilson right now, but Russell Wilson was good in his day. We're all meant to be athletes. God has given us bodies. We don't all have to be the best athlete, right? But He's given us bodies to live out our lives in. This is the vessel that carries us through this journey. We're not like the Gnostics, that St. John and the other apostles are writing against those who sort of downplay the material or the created part of who we are in favor of only the spiritual, right? I mean, just because something's spiritual doesn't make it good, right? And just because our bodies are often let us down doesn't mean that they're not good. When God created us, He said it's good, right? And so being an athlete has been singularly significant for me in helping me to think about leadership. Now, I'm not going to say, and we're all going to be able to plug into this at different places, but you could probably speculate on why has thinking like an athlete been useful for me as a leader. First of all, at Concordia, we had a great run, and I'm going to talk more about running, but we had a great run for 24 years. It was a great experience. And as I look back on it, there are very few things that I would have done differently. In fact, I'd be hard-pressed as I stand here before you to come up with more than one or two, right? But that's because I was part of a great team. And if there's anything that athletics can teach us, and where leaders can benefit, it's about being part of a great team. Yeah, you've got some of these extraordinary individuals who stand out among the rest, right? Ohtani is great, right, for the Dodgers. But where would he be without the other 8 players around him, right? Or LeBron or Michael or whomever. They're individual sports, but team will factor into those too. Forming and being part of a great team, that was really important for me as a leader. Because not only am I not mechanically inclined, there's a lot of stuff I don't know very much about. And as a college president, I think my knowledge capacity was about a mile wide and an inch deep sometimes. So it was really important to me to have people that I could count on who could do their job and let them do their job at what they were good at, because that was part of their role on the team. Here's an interesting stat that my daughter shared with me. Interesting, it's from my daughter, not my son. But athletes, 94% of women in C-suite positions, executive positions, played sports. 94%. 52% of female C-suite executives were college athletes. I shared that yesterday with the student athletes at the CIT breakfast. I said, I'm going to see some of you in the C-suite if you'll take a moment to let me in someday, if you're not too busy, right? You're going to do great things because you're a student athlete. Athletics gets kind of it gets kind of a bad rap sometimes. I mentioned Hutchins, the former president at University of Chicago, when he came on, he got rid of, what do you say? I think I might have the quote here, maybe not. Well, no, in any case, I'll just paraphrase. He got rid of football right away. He pulled University of Chicago out of the Big Ten, got rid of football, and said something like, football, fraternities, and fun, there is no place for these things on the college campus. They were invented only for the entertainment of those who should not be on the college campus. So Hutchins and I were both young when we started as college presidents. We took a very different perspective about the place of athletics in the collegiate experience. One of my favorite writers is a guy by the name of George Sheehan. He died in 1993, but George Sheehan was a doctor, he was kind of a philosopher, he was a long-distance running guru. And he said this, he said, first of all, he said, if I was a college president, I would give scholarships to athletes, not to scholars. Well, anyway, he said, it's time we raise our level of consciousness about the importance of sport and play. We should be educated in the good life, how to attain it. In that, the athlete provides a much better model than the scholar. The athlete is the whole person, integrated, fully functioning, the highly visible pursuit of a highly visible perfection. Athletes teach us the importance of play. Athletes teach us about our bodies, and they offer a new normal. Previously, those we considered normal were spectators heading for a premature old age. But normal is us at the top of our powers, reaching our maximal capacity and potential. Education is a process by which we're able to distinguish what is first rate from what isn't. And sport, more often than not, shows us the elements of what is first rate. It's an arena where a person finds the best within, a theater that reveals courage and endurance and dedication to a purpose, a love for our teammates, and levels of energy we never knew we possessed, and where we see, if only for a moment, how we're supposed to be. Now, that sort of glorifies athletics, I realize. But when I told that to the kids yesterday, I said, you know, that's you guys. That's you guys. You do that for all of us. And when that kid made that last-second shot last night to win that game, I mean, the fans stormed the floor, right? Because he showed us for a moment, you know, the potential that we all have to some degree also in our own lives. So for me, mind, body, spirit, growing in all three of these are still integral to my formation and my perspective as a leader. But I am an athlete. I don't say I was an athlete. I'm very intentional about not saying that. I don't say I was an athlete, because if I say that, then you're going to only think of me as a college basketball player, and I wasn't a very good one, and our team was really rotten too. So I like to say I am an athlete, and more specifically, I'll tell you, I'm a runner. I'm a runner. And in fact, this is important to me in a way of self-identification. I used to say, you know, I'm not so much a college president who runs as I am a runner who also happens to be a college president. Okay, so it's a part of my identity. In the beginning, I didn't like running. I was one of those, you know, sometimes cross-country kids will wear on their shirt, our sport is your sport's punishment, right? So that's sort of how I felt about running. You know, you get in trouble, you do laps or whatever. But I ran in order to chase Tammy, right? She was a runner, and it was one way to court her, right? The only way I could court her was to chase her. And so she's the one who got me into running in the first place. There are physical factors that are useful for a leader, I think, with something like this. Again, you model the integrated person. We're a whole being. We're mind, body, and spirit. We're not just somebody who, you know, spews out ideas or praise for people. Those things are important. But I thought it was important for me as a college president, anyway, to be involved in this highly visible pursuit of excellence. And so when I was on campus, I would run at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I would do it on campus, where all the other teams were out practicing, you know. And I wasn't showing off, I was just showing that it was okay. And when I talked to those same kids in that intro class in their freshman year, and I would talk to them about history is interesting, right? I would also say, hey, I've got, at that time it was probably 60-year-old body, right? I'm gonna run this marathon. You can get up off the couch and stop playing video games and go for a walk, okay? This body that God has given us is a temple of the Spirit. It's the temple of the Spirit. This is the vehicle that's going to carry us throughout the entirety of our life. George Sheehan said, the new normal should not be just sitting around waiting to get old. That we should be reaching for our maximal potential and capacity. And for me, running, for somebody else it might be pickleball, for you it could be a walk, it doesn't matter. But this is part of reaching our full potential as leaders and as servants, is paying attention to the body. Oh, here's that quote. Football, fraternities, and fun have no place in the university. Yeah, that was Robert Hutchins. That wasn't me. In fact, when we took over Concordia Ann Arbor, one of the first things we did, and even before we took over, we encouraged them, you need to start a football team. You need to start a football team. And they took our advice, and then a year later, we all took over. But that first year didn't go very well. This might have been the worst team in the history of collegiate sports, actually. They didn't have their own field. They played on one of the high school fields. Kind of ragtag bunch. They didn't score their first year. They didn't score a single point. And needless to say, lost every game. The next season, first game, they got a touchdown. First game, defensive touchdown. I don't know, they recovered a fumble or something. They immediately were flagged for excessive celebration in the end zone, right? Well, as time would go on, they got to be really good. I mean, really good. And they were, for the last several years, thanks to some graduates from Concordia High School in Fort Wayne and others, they became one of the best teams in small college football. I'm very, very proud of that. And you know, even prouder, Coach Priest first, then Coach Schumacher, they get it. They get it. It's about molding, shaping, forming young people for service for the rest of their lives. I told the students yesterday a story about this guy. And I'm sorry for all the stories, but it's kind of how I roll. So Jeffrey Marks, Pulitzer Prize winning author, wrote a book in 2003, Season of Life it was called. But in any case, I'm going to paraphrase most of this. Jeffrey Marks, when he was a kid, was a ball boy for the Baltimore Colts. And he met one of the players, Joe Ehrman was his name. And Joe became a pastor after he finished his playing days. And then he was also an assistant football coach at Gilman, which is a prestigious high school in Baltimore, Maryland, private high school. And also a school that has had perennially great football teams, nationally ranked USA Today football teams. But Mark's, in the book, I should have brought it, I know I have it on my phone, but I'm not going to take the time to look it up right now, but he talks about this one episode where the coach, whose name was Biff, I mean, what a great name for a football coach, Biff is talking to one of the mothers after a scrimmage early in the season. And after the game, after the scrimmage, and of course Gilman won easily, one of the moms came up to Biff and said, how did he think the boys were going to be? And Biff said, I have no idea. I won't know for another 20 years. Because only in 20 years will I find out what kind of men and husbands and contributors to their community are they going to be, right? He wrote that book in 2003, so that was just over 20 years ago. Just over 20 years ago. And you wonder, how are his players acquitting themselves? You know, Gilman's a very prestigious school, so I'm sure they're doing great. But there was a Gilman graduate who was in the news not too long ago. Did you hear the story? Smartest kid in the room. Valedictorian. Played soccer. Walked up behind a guy on the city sidewalk in New York City, insurance executive, shot him dead on the sidewalk. You can be the smartest guy in the room, and you can do really stupid stuff, right? What kind of a direction are you going to go? And here's the other thing, you know, people applauded that guy. Luigi Mangione, right? That's his name. They applaud him. Oh, he's like some kind of hero. One of my collegiate teammates, his son was a childhood friend of Luigi Mangione. So he knows this kid had everything going for him, right? Had everything going for him. Such a sad story. Such a profoundly sad story. But it doesn't have to be that way. But I was talking about this point. So Erasmus in the 16th century talks about fools. He said, you know, the most arrogant, vain people, those are the fools. But they'll always find others who will applaud them, who will support them, right? Don't be that guy. Don't be that guy. What kind of a husband, what kind of a parent, what kind of a spouse, what kind of a community leader are you going to be? That's what sports teach us. That's what sports, at least, is intended to teach us. We're fearfully, wonderfully made. Normal is us at the top of our powers, reaching for our maximal capacity and potential, mind, body, and spirit. But for me, as a leader, running in particular has been even more useful metaphorically. Physically, yes. I hope I've made that point. But metaphorically, it has also been useful not only for me but for others when we think about leadership. After all, St. Paul says, 1 Timothy 4, 7-8, he says, train yourself to be godly. For physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life of the world to come. Runners can be very obnoxious. And runners talking about running can be particularly nauseating, right? So I apologize for some of that in advance. I know that running is not a panacea. It's not a fountain of youth, right? It's not the solution to everything. And athletics can absolutely be overdone. I think right now college sports is a mess in general, right? With all of the stuff that's going on. It's still fun, but it's a mess. And we're missing the opportunity for some of the most valuable things that come from that experience. But as metaphor, man, running is great. Here we go. I'm going to start with this one, 1 Corinthians 9, 19 to 27. And from these mainly two passages, we're going to gather some of the practical applications. Finally, huh? We're almost done. I told you weren't going to get much out of this. All right, here we go. St. Paul writes this. First, I'm going to back up to before where he talks about his running. Start chapter 9, verse 19. He says, though I am free and belong to no one, I've made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law I became like one not having the law, although I'm not free from God's law, but I'm under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak, to win the weak I became all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. Keep that in mind. And then he says, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified from the prize. Okay, the first question that a leader should ask, or a potential leader, prospective leader, should ask himself or herself is this question. Why? Why do I want to do it? And unless and until you have pretty good handle on that, you might as well just hit pause for a bit, because that's really critical. Why do you want to do it? Talk to somebody who you like, sitting near you for just a moment, and just think about yourself as a leader, as a servant, as in your setting, in this place, wherever you might serve. Why do you want to do it? Why do you want to do it? Just for a minute or two. Why are you here this morning, right? I'm sure you have good reasons. My question for the larger group is this one. What was St. Paul's why? What was his why, just from that passage I read to you? Dan. Yeah, Missio Dei. Translate the Latin for us. That's what he wanted to do, right? And he said it in a very specific sort of way, didn't he? He said, I want to become all things to all people, so that I might by all means save some. To the Jews I became like a Jew, right? To this group I became like, I wanted to connect with people where they were. I wasn't expecting them just, hey, come and be like me, right? I want to say, hey, you know what? We've got to figure it out over here. Just be like us. Evangelism is not trying to convert people to be like us. It's really our effort to be like them and to connect them to Jesus. I have to tell this one. This is not my story. I just heard it yesterday. Pastor Duncan, campus pastor at Concordia Ann Arbor. I'll tell it briefly, but it was just such a fascinating story. He's an evangelist, that guy, right? He's an evangelist. He gets it. He talks about when he was a seminarian here in Fort Wayne once. He had long hair in those days. He's a music guy. Big night out with friends. They went to Olive Garden, right? And, one of our favorite places. And he went to the restroom, and he came out, and there was another long-haired guy there. And he recognized him. The guy's name, I think it was Lou Graham, or is that the guy who was on the Mary Tyler Moore Show? I don't know, whatever. But whatever his name, Lou something, he was the lead singer for a group named Foreigner. And so any old rockers here will know about Foreigner. I want to know what love is. Right? And Randy's playing that song in the background. I want to know what love is. So anyway, Randy strikes up a conversation. Hey, heard you Lou Graham? Gosh, don't tell anybody. But they both had long hair, so they hit it off right when they were talking for a while. And Randy goes, and so Lou asks, hey, what's there to do in Fort Wayne on Sunday night? And Randy said, not a lot going on. Another guy overheard him, and he said, hey, come on down to my place. We got free drinks. It happened to be like at some topless bar, right? And Lou says, hey, that sounds good. You want to go, Randy? And Randy, no, I don't think so. I don't think I'll go. And goes back to his table. And I just talking to the lead singer of Foreigner. And they asked, did you tell him about Jesus? So I said, well, no, it actually didn't come up. Anyway, so they went on, and then they were on their way home, and there were 3 or 4 of the wives that were there, and they said, we prayed about this. We think you need to go and tell Lou Graham about Jesus. I told you where he's going. He said, we know. We think you need to go tell him about Jesus. And so Randy and one of the other guys go down there. They pay their $5 cover fee. He says, walk in like this, and they find Lou over in the corner, and he tells him, hey, Randy, glad you came. And he tells the story much better than I do. It's his story. But he said, Lou, we're not going to stay for long. But I hear that pain in your heart. I want to know what love is. And I'm here to tell you. I just put on my heart to tell you. Jesus is crazy about you. He loves you. And I just felt the need to tell you about that. And anyway, they didn't stay long. But then he played another song after that, made several years later, in which Lou is singing as the background singer for a Christian gospel song that the guy's Christian now, right? I want to be all things to all people. And Randy wasn't taking credit for that, by the way, but he was planting a seed. I want to be all things to all people so that I might by all means save some. This is not easy for us. It wasn't easy for St. Paul either, right? He several times talks about, I did not want to run in vain. I did not want to run in vain. So he says in Galatians, he went to talk to the uppity-ups, the higher-up guys, the apostles who had reputation, to make sure that his ministry to the Gentiles, which was very controversial. Am I doing this right? Am I okay? And they encouraged him. They supported. He wanted to make sure that he wasn't running in vain. That on the day of the Lord, that he writes to the Philippians, he might boast that he did not run or labor for nothing. Run not in vain. All things to all people. So for me, here's an application. For me, that means that leadership is mentoring. It's mentoring. It's kind of taking people where they are and helping them along, bringing them along. St. Paul was eager to do that. I've always been eager to do that. Also as a runner, I mean, if I was half as effective as an evangelist for the gospel as I've been as an evangelist for running, I mean, you would know me as Billy Graham, right? I've got so many people into it. Part of it's because my own enthusiasm for it, right? Part of it's because people, they know they want to do something, right? But mentoring. Jim Collins, in that Good to Great that I mentioned earlier, said, you want to be the best possible leader, level 5 leader, right? It's not just growing a great company. It's not just growing a great organization. He says the level 5 leader plans for succession, for what's going to come next. One of the members on my board was an executive for UPS, United Parcel Service, and he said, job one is succession planning. Terry Donovan, you'll remember him, Dan. Succession planning is job one. I got to tell you, I don't think it's just my opinion, that in our circles, certainly outside of the congregational level, we're horrible at that. We're horrible at succession planning. I mean, in the military, they script this all out. They know how to train leaders, right? They know you're here, you're going to be here, you're going to be here, you're going to be here. We're horrible at that. Ours is driven so much by other stuff, by politics and things that don't work too well. That doesn't have to be true in our congregations. Surely, I hope it's not. But that's why you're here this morning too, right? You want to grow as a leader. You want to grow as a servant. And as you do, be thinking about how you can mentor others, how you can pull not only that kid aside and say, why don't you think about going to seminary someday, but the new members in your congregation, how can I get you involved? How can we meet your needs so that you can help meet others' needs as well? So for me, mentoring is a part of it. Don't forget the why. St. Paul says, focus on the prize, right? I don't want to have run in vain myself. Self-awareness is also, I think, a very important characteristic for leadership. You got to be self-aware. Self-aware, that means all kinds of things. For me, it means stuff like setting a goal and planning for how to reach that goal, visioning, assessing. As a runner, I do that every day. I mean, I have running logs. I keep track, way too much detail, about things to help me to assess how am I doing. How am I doing compared to last year at this time? How am I doing compared to a year before that? Know yourself. Know why you're doing what you're doing. That comes first, but the mentoring then follows it. St. Paul says also in this passage that he goes into strict training. Strict training. Crucify the flesh. He means that also literally. He says, I beat my body. I make it my slave. Strict training. Discipline is important for a leader. Self-awareness, sharing with others, discipline. Running has taught me discipline. I don't know if I was always as disciplined, but there are disciplines that accompany it. Did any of you make a New Year's resolution this year? Have you ever done? Are you doing all right with it, or are you? That's the way you do it. Thank you. It's like you're like my setup man. You know, you got to start before the year ends if you want to have some success. And I had particular success with one of my New Year's resolution, late December 2012. It was, maybe you'll remember this. This was near the end of the year 2012. It was in December of that year that, according to the Mayan calendar, the world was supposed to end, right? So I decided that the day before the world was supposed to end, that I was going to run every single day that I possibly could. And if the world ended, it wouldn't be that big a deal, right? Just one day. So, but anyway, I started a running streak with the intention that every day, every single day that was possible, I was going to run at least a mile every day. And I started, and I discovered that it was possible to run just about every day at least a mile. And for me, it became kind of like flossing, right? You know, something you got to do before you go to bed. You got to brush your teeth. You wouldn't want to end the day with, maybe you don't floss. If you really should do that too. That's not on. But you know, I had to do it. Had to do everything. There was one time we're traveling internationally. My wife Tammy and I were in Prague, Czech Republic, and we have an early morning flight the next day, and we're going to be traveling all day. How are we going to get it done? So at midnight, we're out running through the streets of Prague. Prague, by the way, is a very romantic city. There are all kinds of lovers walking arm in arm, strolling, and then you've got these two old 50-something-year-olds running through the streets of Prague. Well, you have to make it a discipline. I had to make it a discipline, otherwise I wouldn't get it done. On December 31st this year, John Sutherland ended his running streak. It had lasted 20,309 days. He started in May 1969. 55 years, 7 months, 6 days. Ran every single day. And then the air was getting hard to breathe in California, and he was having a hard time, so he decided to pack it in. I'm sure he was disappointed. Disappointment is something else that leaders need to deal with. It's a part of the plan. It's part of the deal. Disappointment. And there's nothing quite as disappointing as the end of my first running streak. It lasted 2,296 days, just over 6 years. I had the flu. I wasn't feeling very well. I'd been running every day up to that point. It just was feeling cruddy. And I was preaching at Concordia on Sunday mornings. I often did that for the students. And I was feeling lousy. I told them, hey, I'm not going to shake your hand afterward because I don't want to give you any germs, and got through the sermon okay, and took the offering. Want to make sure you get through the offering. And then we're about ready to do the Lord's Supper, right? Just getting ready, and I'm standing behind the altar, and I'm thinking, then I don't know what I was thinking. The next thing I knew, I was on my back. And I hit my head on the altar, hit my head on the marble floor. We wish we had not taken the carpet out. But anyway, hit it hard, and then all of a sudden I open my eyes, and I don't see angels and archangels and all the company of heaven, right? I see my son and a few others, and they're kind of hovering over me, and the ambulance is on the way. And as they're taking me out to, go to the hospital, I tell my son Andrew, I said, I haven't run yet today. I haven't got my run in yet. So I get to the hospital, and as it turns out, it was just the flu, and I was dehydrated and all of that. But they were worried there might be something cardiac, and so they said, we might have to do an angiogram. And I said, let's just make sure it's not just the flu. They said, well, we could do a stress test. I said, yeah, let's do a stress test. Could we do that tonight? Can we do that? And unfortunately, they wouldn't let me get on the treadmill that night. But so anyway, 6 days later, streak number 2 starts. I was disappointed, but not defeated. And that streak wasn't quite as long, 1,277 days, a little over 3 years. Visiting Kyle and Rachel in Milan, Michigan. They were living at the time. Feeling pretty good about how it was going. Walking down the steps to their basement, pretty treacherous steps. Missed the last one. Tear the quad ligament right off the knee. Just tore it completely ruptured it. I'm laying there writhing, screaming in pain. My wife, Tammy, Rachel, come down. They call an ambulance. First, the firefighters came, then the police came, and then there's not a lot going on in Milan. They got to have something to do. So it felt like the whole city infrastructure was in the basement with me down there. But then that one knocked me out for quite a while. That was several months that I couldn't really get it going. And then streak number 3, assuming I run today, 483 days if I get in. It was tough early this week in Ann Arbor. It was cold, man. I had layers on. I could have gone to the Y, I guess, but anyway. Disappointment. Humble in victory, gracious in defeat. You know how many races I've won? 1. Very weak field, okay? I lose all the time. Constantly losing. In road races, running races, other races, right? Losing teaches us more than winning. So let me summarize just this little section, see if you have any questions. Know your why. Why do I want to do this? Mentoring, preparing others to run their race, self-awareness, discipline, dealing with disappointment by just keep on going, right? Keep on going. Questions, and I have one more text I want to work through as well, but questions on this little section here. Observations, arguments, disputes. Should we do one more? Let's turn to some of my favorite passages. These are from Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. I'll set it up for you. In Hebrews chapter 11, the holy writers talking about that all of these great heroes of the Old Testament. It's like the Hall of Fame of Old Testament leaders and heroes, people who've gone through trials and struggles and difficulties. And in writing to the Hebrews, he's writing to people who are facing persecution, challenges from the world around them. We face those, not like they faced, but we face those too. So he's writing to people who are up against it. And he points them to the examples of the Old Testament prophets and saints who had gone before them. And then writes these passages. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Okay? Let us run, this great cloud of witnesses around us, let us run with perseverance, endurance, the race that's laid out for us, looking to Jesus, and one of the translations says, who gives us our faith from start to finish, from baptism's renewing splash to ashes and dust to dust. Keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, who for the joy set before him endured all of these things so that we should not grow weary in our faith and give up either. Couple things from this section. First of all, the cloud of witnesses, right? The cloud of witnesses. Leadership, I think, is being mindful of those upon whose shoulders we stand, right? And I'm a historian, so that maybe makes some sense, but I think it's more than that. Respect for predecessors is a mark of leadership, and our politicians are awful at it. I mean, they're awful. All of them. They're awful at it. They kind of build themselves up by tearing others down. When my predecessor, who had been president for 18 years, left Concordia, it was under a different kind of a cloud, a little bit of a cloud at that time. But he was a great man, and he had singularly helped Concordia to survive and to thrive. And I made it a personal mission of mine, every opportunity I could, to hold him up. First thing I did was name the field house after him, right, with the approval of the board. And of course, he's been gracious and has helped me so much ever since. I think how you treat those who were leaders before you is an important mark of leadership. So that's the cloud of witnesses. But it's not just the cloud of witnesses who've gone on before us. It's also the ones who are around us, right? So leadership embraces camaraderie. It embraces team. It embraces support for others. It embraces cooperation and competition. And running, perhaps different from many other sports. When you're in a race, and maybe sprints are different, but in a long distance race, the person right next to you is your competitor, but you're helping each other out. You're supporting each other. You're running alongside each other, and that makes for common ground. I had an opportunity once, twice actually, but the first time to meet George W. Bush when he was president. Tim Gagline, your local Fort Wayne guy here, set this up. George Bush was coming to meet with at a church to talk about the faith-based initiative. It was a Church of God in Christ, so it was an African-American church, basically, and some key leaders in Milwaukee. And there were 5 of us in the reception line, members of that church, the bishop, his wife, other leaders, and then me. I was the only white guy. Let's just put it that way. So George Bush is coming along, and he's shaking hands with everybody, and he gets to me, and I can tell he's a little bit confused. So I tell him, I'm here from Concordia, but I didn't want to talk to him about that because he wouldn't care about that. I just said, I wish you would have brought your running shoes along. We could have gone for a little jog. He had just run a marathon not too long before that. And he said, oh, you look like you could run circles around me. He said, I don't know. You had this 3 whatever time. He said, yeah, that's pretty good. So we talked for about 3 minutes because runners talk ad nauseum about their running. Well, a few years later, George Bush comes and he's our commencement speaker at Concordia, So it's good. Common ground. Competition also leads to cooperation. I was in Beijing, China. Have to keep the running streak going, right? So get up one morning, leave the hotel, and I'm going to run to Tiananmen Square because I thought that would be interesting, historic, right? And there's a lot of traffic in Beijing, and I kind of know where I'm going. And I get running, and the stoplights are forever. So this light, I see it's changing. I speed across the street. Well, speed is a relative term, right? But I hurry across the street, going faster than I normally would. And just as I get across the street, turning the corner is a battalion of Chinese soldiers, also on a morning run together. And they're turning, and they're running the same direction on this fairly narrow sidewalk with me. So we're running together. I'm running faster than I normally would, and I'm going about the same pace that they are. And we're running together, and it's kind of unnerving for a moment. And then all of a sudden, it's sort of competitive. And I hear the leader yell out something, must have said, let's get rid of this guy, or whatever. And so they kind of pick it up. And then, for the red, white, and blue, I pick it up too. Right? And so we're running along, pretty good clip. They're going, and we get to Tiananmen Square, and I go this way, and they go that way. But it's a square. So we come around, we see each other. The first time, kind of look at each other. Second time, they wave to me. The third time, they're blowing me kisses, right? I'll never forget it, obviously. Doesn't mean much, but it's a really good story. No, actually, it shows that competition, that there could still be cooperation, and that competition is not a bad thing, but it should not devolve into comparison. Teddy Roosevelt, pretty good athlete himself, by the way. Teddy Roosevelt once said that comparison is the thief of joy. It's the thief of joy. We're sort of prone to it. What's our church like compared to that church? What's this compared to that? You know, and that, maybe you have to have some data that's useful in that regard, but for the most part, competition, cooperation, comparison, not so much. Not for me. And then there's also criticism. There's also criticism. The same Teddy Roosevelt, there's going to be criticism if you're a leader. I mean, you're just not going to please all the people all the time. This is one of the great Teddy Roosevelt quotes, I think. Have you heard what he said about the critic? He said, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust, sweat, and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcoming. But who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who knew neither victory nor defeat." There are a lot of critics out there. There are a lot of critics. And they can come from every side. And it's not that you are unaware of them, and it's not that you don't pay attention to, legitimate, helpful critique, but you can waste a lot of time trying to satisfy every critic. Dean Wenthe, former president of the seminary here, a friend of mine, he talked about when he was president of the seminary that, that he found that he was spending way too much time trying to respond to the critics. And like comparison, they will rob you of your joy too, right? They will rob you of your joy. So he decided, I'm going to spend more of my time working with people who have kind of positive approach and perspective on this. You can't ignore them. You can't avoid them. But in the great cloud of witnesses running around us, it's better to run alongside those who are working toward the same goal with you. And how about when things go bad? Like we're running out of time. Maybe that's not bad. Maybe you're ready to be done. A few more minutes. When things go bad, and sometimes in running things can go bad. I was running the Boston Marathon 2018. Is that the right year? Yeah, 2018. I was older. Like Bob Seger says, I'm older now, but still running. Older now, but still running. Against the wind, against the wind. Against the wind, against the wind. It says about 100 times in that song. Against the wind, still running again. I'm older now, I'm still running against the wind, against the wind. Anyway, 2018. And I'm older now, but I'm in good shape. I mean, I'm excited. I'd run a couple of Boston marathons before. I was ready to really nail it this time. And, I was watching the weather forecast, and it was not looking good. Not looking good at all. Day before was okay. Day after was fine. That day, it was awful. It was in the 30s, sleet, more rain than snow, coming down in buckets. The waiting area is where people gather before the race. Muddy. It looks like just some refugee camp. People are huddling. They're waiting in line to use the restroom because runners are always too hydrated, right? So I know it's too much information, but it's the way it goes. And then you wait in line. People go in the porta-john. They stay in there because it's the only warm place, right? And so you wait. It's just awful. I mean, it couldn't have been worse. And against the wind, it's 30 mile an hour sustained headwinds, gusting to 40, pouring rain, drenching. I was hoping to run 3:30. I ran 3:51, which was pretty good. all things considered. At the time, though, it was like, it's just miserable. But in retrospect, man, I was there. I was there in the thick of the worst weather in the history of the Boston Marathon. And I learned so much. I learned so much. And St. James says, consider it a pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds, because you know the testing of your faith develops perseverance. When you're tested, consider it a joy. You know, when you're going through those difficult times, leadership and service, consider it a joy, because this is building your endurance. This is testing you to help you to persevere. And then going back to Hebrews, throw off whatever entangles. Okay, whatever it is that's entangling you, get rid of it. It's weighing you down. Throw it off. Look to Jesus, who gives us faith from start to finish. Don't grow weary and lose heart. So summary of this part, and then I'm going to have just a couple of quick hitters at the end from this Hebrews section. What do I learn about leadership and service to the Lord in His church? Patience and perseverance, right? Patience and perseverance. There aren't really, in leadership, very many quick fixes to things. For me, it was always about delayed gratification. And that's a distance runner's mentality, part of the training, part of the racing, delayed gratification. But also with the cloud of witnesses who've gone before us, remembering and respecting. Remembering and respecting. And for the ones who are running alongside us, supporting and encouraging, competing and cooperating. And then borrowing from Roosevelt, dare greatly. I think leaders need to dare greatly. When the Lord entrusts us with talents, it's not the one who buries those, playing it safe. It's the one who steps out and dares greatly. The one who tries stuff. And critics will come. Don't spend a lot of time worrying about them. And sometimes there will be failures. Consider it all a pure joy as you look to Jesus from start to finish. Well, can I give you one more that I wasn't planning to, but you've prompted me to think that it might be worthwhile. So this is from 2 Samuel 18, 19 to 33. This is after the rebellion against King David. He's waiting for news about his son Absalom. And you know how deeply that hurt him when his son had died, and how deeply he mourned. And this is leading up to the to sharing that bitter news with him. Now Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said, "Let me run and take the news to the king that the Lord has vindicated him by delivering him from the hand of the enemies." "You're not the one to take the news today," Joab told him. "You may take the news another time, but you must not do so today because the king's son is dead." Then Joab said to a Cushite, "Go tell the king what you have seen." The Cushite bowed down before Joab and ran off. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, again said to Joab, "Come what may, please let me run behind the Cushite." But Joab replied, "My son, why do you want to go? You don't have any news that will bring you a reward." He said, "Come what may, I want to run." That should be my theme verse anyway, right? "Come what may, I want to run." So Joab said, "Run." Then Ahimaaz ran by way of the plain and outran the Cushite. And then we have David waiting. He sees these runners coming, and there are two of them, and he's trying to discern, what's the message they're bringing? What does this mean? Looks like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok's coming. He's a good man, the king said. He comes with good news. And then Ahimaaz called out to the king, "All is well." He bowed down before the king with his face to the ground and said, "Praise be to the Lord your God. He has delivered up those who lifted their hands against the Lord my king." The Lord the king. The king said, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" Ahimaaz answered, "I saw great confusion, just as Joab was about to send the king's servants and me your servant, but I don't know what it was." The king said, "Stand aside, wait here." So he stepped aside, and then the Cushite came, and he asks about Absalom, and the Cushite's the one who brought him the news, "Oh, Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son." Ahimaaz wasn't the man for the job. And sometimes those who aspire to leadership have to take pause and have to recognize that I'm not the person for that job. It's not always easy, right? You want to lead, you want to run, you want to be the one, but that may not be the right thing for you. Now, that can also be an easy excuse, right? No, I don't think it's the right thing for me. But part of that self-awareness is taking stock and recognizing that, hey, I want to run. I want to run things. You might not be the right person for that. I've learned that many times, that I'm not the right person for the job. Finally, just a little fun about runners and running. This will bring us to the empty tomb, which is, of course, where we like to end our session anyway. Runners, talk about running too much. People don't like to hear about it. So we have to find ways to slip it in. Just to slip it in. Humble brags. Listen for the humble brag of the disciple whom Jesus loved at the empty tomb. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but he didn't go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still didn't understand from the scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. John was faster than Peter. And in his gospel, he made sure that we knew that. But more than that, as he concludes his gospel, he says, "These things were written so that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing in him you might have life in his name." And that's the joy that brings this group together, that Jesus is raised from the dead. He's raised from the dead, and all that he has accomplished and shown us is there to affirm us in our faith in him. Faith that leads us, like St. Paul, to strive to be all things to all people, using the gifts God has given us to reach people in every place that we possibly can, and to recognize the places where perhaps we're not the one for the job, but that we might by all means reach some. Thanks for letting me be a part of your morning today. I'll hang around a little bit if you have any more questions you want to ask, but God bless you, and thanks very much, Pastor, for the invitation.